Hello, everyone. Good evening or good afternoon from wherever you're joining us today. My name is Kim Kudadring, and I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens. And on behalf of our George W. and Kathleen I. Gibbs Director and CEO, Dr. Andrea Barnwell-Brownlee, as well as our entire board of trustees, I'm so delighted to welcome you to this virtual Culture and Conversation program. Big thanks to the many sponsors of our exhibition series, including what you see on the screen, the City of Jacksonville, Cultural Council of Greater Jacksonville, Lori Doolittle, Ron and Karen Retner, the Robert D. Davis Family Endowment, the Schultz Family Endowment, the State of Florida, the Director's Circle at the Cummer Museum, as well as the Winston Family Foundation. Thank you all so much for your support. We're delighted to be here tonight. And before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. For this virtual program, we are recording, so you probably got a notification on your screen. Just say got it, or if that's not comfortable to you, you can head out and tune into the Cummer Museum YouTube channel later on in the coming weeks. We will post this video so you can watch it over and over. We also would love to hear from you this evening. You can use the Q&A function to ask the panelists, who are 4 artists, and myself any questions you have. The attendees, so you all as attendees, will not be visible or audible, but go ahead and use that Q&A function. After about 45 to 60 minutes or so, we'll have time for Q&A, and we'll address as many questions as we can. All right, so as you're seeing these beautiful gallery installation photos from Doug Eng, today is about exploring beauty, mystery, healing power, all of nature, and specifically through the perspectives of 4 contemporary artists who are participating in the exhibition that's called Outside In. So this exhibition is bringing in works by a variety of different artists who draw inspiration from the natural world, and they also work in a variety of different media, which you will see tonight and learn more about tonight. Some of that is painting, photography, assemblage, video, even glass. So lots of very cool and interesting materials. And this exhibition was organized by the Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens and our own chief curator, Holly Karras. And again, thank you to Doug Eng for the beautiful exhibition photography. If you haven't seen the exhibition yet, it is on view through November, and we hope to see you at the museum soon. So now let's go ahead and meet some of these artists. We're going to do it visually through their photos first, and then you will hear from each of them, and then we'll have more of a conversation. So first, I'm going to introduce you to Frances. Frances Gallardo holds an MFA from Cornell University College of Architecture, Art, and Planning, a bachelor's degree in Drawing and Humanities from the University of Puerto Rico. Her interdisciplinary practice examines the cultural, geopolitical, and historical complexities of the Caribbean meteorological landscape through an eco-poetic lens. And she's featured in the permanent collections of public and private institutions, including the Rollins Museum of Art in South Florida, Museo de Arte de Puerto Rico, Purdue University, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. So glad Jill can be with us. So glad that Frances can be with us. Jill is up next. So Jill Hotchkiss was born in Hollywood, Florida. Jill received her Master of Fine Arts in Sculpture from Pratt Institute and Bachelor of Fine Arts in Graphic Design from the University of Florida. Jill's participated in artist residencies in public art and School of Visual Arts in New York and at the ULI Arts in Miami. Jill is also mesmerized by nature's patterns and is now exploring fungi and the critical role of fungal networks in the well-being of our environment. Jill places the viewer underground, you will see that very prominently, at the level of an intricately weaved mycorrhizal network. Next up is Debora Moore. Debora was born in St. Louis, Missouri, currently lives in Seattle. She's a botanical sculptor and started working with glass in the late 1980s at Pratt Fine Arts Center. Debora focuses on plant materials such as orchids and flowering trees and is informed by her deep engagement with nature. She spent time in nature around the world to observe and sketch specimens, including trips to places such as Antarctica, Caribbean, and Southeast Asia. Her sculptures are in the collections of the Chrysler Museum of Art, the Corning Museum of Glass, the Crocker Art Museum, the Renwick Gallery of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and the Tacoma Art Museum. And last but not least, Sarah Ann Weber. Sarah is based in Los Angeles, and her multidisciplinary practice spans painting, drawing, sculpture, and presents really compelling and brightly colored artworks. Sarah is experimental with her practice, often making use of watercolor and colored pencil to create smooth and vibrant textures. Her zestful works of art are multi-layered, combining historical photographs with elaborate floral patterns and natural landscapes. She moves between gestural drawings, techniques, and fine detailed line work to create striking works that explore gender and beauty. So we're delighted to have all 4 panelists today. And what we're going to do now is we're going to start with Frances, but let me set up the scene here. Each of the artworks from these artists was specifically selected for this exhibition, which again was organized by the museum. And as you can see, and if you've heard, each artist works in a very different medium, using materials, tools, scales to express themselves. So I'm going to ask each artist first a very specific question, asking them to tell us a little bit about how their work celebrates nature, including contrasting dualities such as fragility and strength, movement and stillness, science and spirituality. So Frances, we're going to start with you and your unnamed series, which I'm going to pull up on the screen right now. So this series draws, actually, let me go back real quick. This series draws on newscast, scientific data, photography, and satellite imagery. So there's a lot of data, science, information that's coming together in this specific series. What roles do both movement and stillness have in your specific works?
Hi, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so honored and happy to have different series of my work featured in the exhibition along Debora, Sarah, Jill, and so many other incredible artists. So thank you to Holly Karras for inviting me to be a part of her vision. I really appreciate it. And of course, Kim, thank you for the question. Yes, definitely movement is something that is a connector in my work. As you mentioned briefly in my bio, a lot of my work has to do with landscape, specifically meteorological landscape. I have been very, very interested in everything that is sort of like a meteorological or atmospheric front, this ephemerality or transience of the atmosphere in the Caribbean, specifically Puerto Rico, which is where I grew up, where I was born and I grew up. And I've explored that theme of the hurricane surges, overflows of water, just the effects in general of hurricanes for many years, I'd say more than a decade. And The Unnamed is part of that exploration that's taken the shape of like paper cutouts, collage installations, and in this case, embroidery. I thought for this piece titled The Unnamed that embroidery was a really interesting and direct way of talking about that particular movement, right? That trances or translation of the tracks of the hurricane. So you can see formally, right, how every single line has a different stitch, a different color. And what's also interesting is how I kind of for this piece titled The Unnamed used as a tool certain just like open source data sets that are available online through the NOAA, which is the National Atmospheric and Oceanic Administration. So they have a lot of valuable and interesting information. But for me, I felt that I had like I mean, being Puerto Rican, being from the Caribbean, and also, you know, folks in Florida and different parts of the Panhandle, you know, that also get affected with the passage of the hurricanes. I thought that there was a lot of like extra information, extra feeling, extra added yeah, knowledge, right, about what it feels like to experience these phenomena. And I felt like once I started looking at all this data, all these tracks, all these hurricane tracks, I started noticing, if we can leave it there, I started note maybe in the picture that is just like the round piece, like the full work. Just if we can go back to the, yes, thank you. So I noticed how some of the hurricanes tracks that were recorded, right, in this website where you could just press any single place of the Caribbean or the world, and it would tell you all, the recorded hurricane tracks, historical hurricane tracks. I noticed that some of them didn't have names, and I thought that that was just such a fascinating aspect of this data set, right? Like, why didn't it have a name? And there's a whole like political aspect to naming, right? Naming nature, but or natural phenomena, kind of as a way of controlling or understanding or assimilating it. And I felt like the fact that these hurricanes were rogue, were sort of like marooned or independent, had escaped that power gesture of being named, deserved, right, like a place in this like sort of like portraits of unnamed hurricanes. And then I started, as you can see, juxtaposing different landfalls of hurricanes in Jacksonville, Puerto Rico, different kinds, different areas of the Caribbean, or areas, geographical areas that are affected by hurricanes, because I felt that, even though it has that layer about the naming, there's also something interesting about how these experiences, right, kind of like overlap, even though we come from different cultural heritages or, idiosyncrasies. There is something that definitely binds us together, like a sensibility for the landscape that is very particular to the region. So I was kind of like not only connecting, right, like these paths that overlay, like a hurricane might pass through Havana and then pass through like Miami, right? But it's a different hurricane altogether once it gets to that other place. So I just felt that it was not only like a geographical connection, but a connection of these things in time as well, like an intergenerational thing. So yeah, so that was kind of my way of exploring also that movement and that passing of the hurricane, both emotionally, right, and like physically in the geographic uh, space. And I use, again, like silk, as you can see in the background, because it has this beautiful sheen, kind of gives it an extra three-dimensionality to the thread as well, if you see it in person, if you get to see the show. And also, well, clearly, thank you, the blue. And if you notice here, sometimes I also use the removal of the thread just to leave kind of a mark of something that might have been forgotten. So there's a lot of poetry and a lot of metaphor in these pieces. And I'll stop there because I can talk about the unnamed for a long time, but I think that kind of sums up my answer. Thank you.
Well, it's just absolutely gorgeous, and we tried to get photos that show that intricate detail and I would say the movement of the paths, as well as the movement of the paths in relation to each other.
Mhm.
It's really stunning and very striking in person. The size is also impressive. So it's, not this like tiny hoop, but a decent size circle with
Great.
beautiful materials. Yeah.
That's a great point, Kim, and it's true. Like usually we see like smaller hoops, right? Presented, but this is like a non-traditional. It doesn't have like the rim, right?
Mhm.
And something that I forgot to mention too is like regarding movement is like every stitch also talks about that particular cadence, right? Of every hurricane. It's almost like every thread, every color is a portrait of the hurricane. So yeah, thank you.
Mm. It's stunning. It's so much fun. I can't wait for everyone to come visit the exhibition if they haven't already. Okay, well, we're going to move on to Sarah next. Let me pull up Sarah's slide and we'll get you spotlighted. Sarah, this work is titled Gem Magnolias, and I was noticing that you wrote that you started this work specifically in late spring as the actual real life magnolias were starting to bloom. Frances was just talking about kind of control, interconnectedness, and kind of that the way that we're all connected through nature. But tell us a little bit more about your process and your connections to nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I loved hearing how Frances talked about movement on a much more macro scale with the patterns of the way these hurricanes move, kind of from an aerial perspective as well. And I think with my work, I am dealing with movement and intricate interconnectivity of vines and branches on a much more human scale, or even on a more micro scale. I tend to draw a lot from my surroundings. So there are a lot of botanicals in my work, but with my process, I work from a very intuitive place. So I never know how a piece is going to end up looking when I set it out. I live in California and I go on walks or hikes in my neighborhood almost every day. And so I think my work starts from that point, when I'm out in nature, moving through it, just noticing a new plant or a succulent in bloom. And yeah, California is a really unique environment. I'm not originally from here. I'm originally from Illinois. So when I moved out to Southern California 9 years ago, I was just kind of blown away by the amount of botanicals and succulents that felt so abstract and almost alien or unrealistic. And so that really compelled me to want to incorporate them into my compositions. That's kind of when the work became rooted in this abstract landscape, because that's what I was seeing every day. And so the gem magnolias are just an example of that, just these beautiful big flower forms. But when I'm drawing the gem magnolia flower, I'm not looking at a botanical illustration or a photograph. I'm just thinking about that walk I went on earlier in the week, and thinking about the flower shape as filtered through my own memory. I'm really interested in using memory as this filter that allows the work to be imbued with a sense of abstraction. And it also gives me freedom to play and change colors or change forms as I want to. And again, working from a very intuitive place, a lot of emotionality gets put into the work as well. So, depending on how I'm feeling that day in the studio, it can really shape how the work ends up looking. So as you can see from this detail shot, there's a lot of scribbles, and then next to like more finely rendered slower marks. This piece, I should say, is also colored pencil primarily, and the scribbles that are looser is oil pastel. I do play with a lot of paint material in my work as well, but this piece in particular is almost all drawn. And so I think there's like a meditative element that is also part of my process that I think, again, starts with going on a walk, being directly in nature. That's sort of where the meditation and thoughts and observations begin. And then I carry that with me into the studio, and just that kind of, drawing really slows you down. And it can put you on the best studio days into a very meditative mindset. And so I think that is a very important part of my process in and out of the studio, I would say.
I'm so glad you mentioned the materials that you use as well, because we've had conversations with folks in the gallery, and they're so surprised. Because I think when people think of colored pencils, it's more of that common material that people don't create works on paper that look stunning like this when they're using colored pencils. So they're just shocked and amazed about how dynamic and bright and familiar but abstract at the same time your work ends up being.
Well, thank you. And I think that a lot of times people think about drawing as, or like the material of colored pencils as something that you might do use in a preparatory capacity, just maybe an initial sketch, but then I'm really interested in pushing the boundaries and, seeing what you can do, with kind of these everyday materials. And yeah, I mean, drawing is something that I think doesn't have to only belong to a preparatory level. It can be used to make a very large work of art like this one as well.
Yes, you've definitely proven that concept. So fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to move on to Debora next. Debora, your medium itself. So this is a gallery photo from Doug Eng. This is your work, Wisteria, in the Commer Museum, and your medium, which is glass. That also might be very surprising to people because it's not what we expect or anticipate glass to look like. The glass is so incredibly fragile, yet rigid and sturdy. So you have these two dichotomies playing against each other. You wrote that you use this medium to translate the breathtaking grandeur and delicate fragility of the natural world into a unique sculptural interpretation. So in this work, and on all of your work, tell us about these delicate balances, such as the interdependency and fragility and strength that you end up conveying through your work. And also, how did you come to work with glass itself? Oh, we're going to go ahead and unmute you.
Is everything
There you
now?
go.
Oh, great.
Gotcha.
So I just wanted to say how honored I am to be with such wonderful group of women, artists who are just incredible, and to be a part of this and everyone's interest in the work. So thank you so much. So my work has a lot to do. We mentioned earlier that I go out into temperate rainforests, desert, different places, and I'm studying and sketching out plants and flowers that I see that I am interested in. And I don't take a camera for a reason, certain reason is so that I can kind of sculpt what my mind's eye is seeing. And so that's basically why I go out into the different forests and gardens and places, deserts, to study. What I like to do is to have the delicate flowers that are hanging from the wisteria in juxtaposition of the gnarly trunk and the heaviness of the trunk, but yet the flowers are still floating in light, in our light. Is there a next slide? So this is a great example of what I'm seeing out in the forest. So I see the trees, I see orchids attaching themselves to these trees, and I'm trying to put it all in one sculpture. Again, juxtaposition, the light, airiness, and the delicateness of the lady slipper attached compared to the trunk and the sculpture aspect. On orchids, they attach themselves to rocks and plants, rocks and trees, but they don't absorb any nutrients. And so, and they grow hydroponically. So this is my host series, and I'm trying to get all of this in saying all of this in one piece. And you can see one of the reasons why I like to work with glass is because it transmits and reflects light. And oftentimes when you're orchid hunting or looking for flowers in the forest, you can see the light kind of shining through maybe a flower or a leaf of a tree or a plant. And this medium really works well for what it is that I'm trying to say. The next slide. So this is white bamboo. And I love this because there's like about 90 pieces of bamboo in this installation. This is an installation in 2015 for the Northwest African American Museum. But what I love about it is that there's only 3 flowers in this whole installation. And it's kind of like when you're, again, out in the forest, the jungle, or whatever, oftentimes the flowers are camouflaged amongst the trees or whatever the host is. And sometimes it can be bamboo, or oftentimes it's part of my imagination. And orchids oftentimes mimic a part of an insect, so the insect can pollinate the orchid. So I put a red lip not a fragmentation, but a cattleya on this piece that's camouflaged, as if I were looking up in the trees or looking in the bamboo forest and I've spotted an orchid. And then there's a simple like orchid lady slipper that blends in, that's speckled and white and is like nice and delicate, but the bamboo is heavy and white and kind of makes you feel a little cold, which I really like. And then the last slide is blue epiphyte, and it's a blue lady slipper, which really there aren't any in nature, but I have so much fun with texture, and blue and green are one of my favorite combinations. And so through the last 3 images that we've looked at, I'm just trying to show the light etherealness of the flower in juxtaposition to the heavy background of the host, the bamboo, or whatever I attach it to.
That certainly conveyed in the wisteria as well, where you see the heaviness of the trunk and the green, almost mossiness on it, but then the lightness and the way of the wisteria flower and the way the light does transmit through it. So it's amazing the type of contrast that you're able to achieve with glass.
Thank you.
It's gorgeous.
It's a challenge, but the nice part about glass is that you can shape and form it. It's very malleable, and then you can freeze it at any moment, so you can get nice shapes. It's a wonderful medium to work with for that reason as well.
It's very impressive. It's really impressive. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So if we're going to go to Jill next, and then we'll be able to open it up to everyone. So Jill, and I hope everyone can see this on the screen. You can't totally tell the scale, but this photo is in the gallery, and you could see your artwork that really is floor to ceiling. It's very impressive, and that scale really suggests the comprehensive root to top perspective of the organic material that you're presenting to the viewer. Tell us a little bit more about your process and your connections with nature.
Sure. And so first, I just want to say thank you so much, Kim, for organizing this, and of course to Holly Karras for creating this really compelling exhibition. It's really been a wonderful experience, so thank you. And so to talk about my process a little bit, I'm here in my studio, and my process is cyclical in nature. It goes through different phases in a very cyclical nature. I try to also emulate geological forces in nature. So things like erosion, wind, gravity, and rain. And I integrate those into the process of making of the work. So just to lead you through sort of the phases of the process, and you can kind of see here, I start from a very simple drawing is the foundation of my work. And so I start from a very simple drawing where I'm looking at observational drawings. So I do freehand drawings, and I use lots of different reference material, scientific journals, botanical illustrations from books. I'll bring different specimens into the studio. I'm actually growing mushrooms here now. So I always love when I can have actually live specimens in the studio to draw from. And then sometimes from memory. And so it starts from a very simple drawing. I select which specimens that I want to use to convey different things. And it's pencil on paper, and I'm freehanding the drawings and very simple sort of shapes and compositions. And once I get sort of that movement down, and some of the other artists were talking about movement, which I really appreciated. Once I get the movement down that I'm trying to achieve in the drawing, I'll then ink it in, and it's more final form. But when I'm drawing it, I actually try to get all of the details of the form in. But then once I get the final composition, a lot of the detail disappears, and I'm focusing then just on the final form, which you can see here, the silhouetted images of the botanicals. And so this kind of references back to the 1800s and the early 1900s of the silhouetted portraits. It's a sort of nostalgic way of capturing a significant occasion. And I really love just focusing on the actual form and not getting distracted by the details or the color of it. And so that's the first phase. And then the black and white ink drawings are sort of the blueprints. Those are sketches for me. And then they work their way into the next phase, which is metal drawings, which is what you're seeing here and is at the museum now. These are all comprised of different metal leaves. Sometimes they're precious metals, 24 karat gold, and sometimes they're a composite alloy that's made of zinc and copper. And the final form, the final phase of the cycle is the wood carved. They evolve and make their way into carved wood relief pieces, which are then embellished with the metals as well. And that's the final form. And it's almost like printmaking in reverse, because the plate, so to speak, or the wood plate is the final part of the phase. And so, as a nature, it's not extremely linear. As you could see in the studio, there's a lot of different pieces in here that are in different parts of the phase, or like different parts of the garden are going at once. So that's a little insight into the process. And then how, part of the question was my connection to nature. And just to talk about that for a minute or two, as a young girl growing up, we had a house in North Carolina. So I was fortunate enough to spend summer sort of tucked away on the side of a mountain, far removed from civilization. And I didn't realize at the time how fortunate I was for that experience. But my two brothers would go off and do their brotherly thing. And my dog and I would just sort of explore the land, and nature really became a companion for me. And so I have some, very young memories of, creating a pool from a little stream with my dog, and, building up rocks and really tapping into the magic and the awe and wonder of nature. Rhododendrons would become caves, and so that has stayed with me, and so much so that I've devoted sort of a life's practice to it. So I'm really grateful for that experience, and I guess how it relates to the work of the museum now. Kim, what you so kindly mentioned in the intro is I'm looking closely at fungal networks and botanical systems. My work has been established for the past 15 years on these dendritic-like patterns. So that just means branch-like patterns that we find recurring in nature. And to me, there's something very sacred about this recurring pattern, sort of binds or bonds all life forms. And so that I really try to emphasize, as you can see in the scale here in the scrolls, that's a really critical and important part of the work, sort of making the invisible visible, and using gold and to really elevate the subject matter. So using scale and medium to point back to the subject matter, which is nature, which is very important in my work. And so I guess the main take home for these pieces is must nature be gilded for its preservation? A little bit of tongue in cheek, but yeah, so I think that sort of encapsulates my process and the work in the museum and my connection to nature.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I agree with the scale conveys importance and prominence, and then also feeling like we really, as people, are seeing the whole organism from the top to below the surface, which we almost never see, and well below the surface. What's happening below the surface oftentimes is quite larger than what we see above the surface. And then the gildedness, it just gives it this regal glow and awe. And one of those photos, I was explaining to you earlier, I kept going into the gallery and putting myself in different positions with just one of the scrolls, because you see the way the light plays on it. And it's just it's a fascinating perspective in thinking about how we view nature and what attracts us about these works that are based on actual specimens.
Thank you. Yeah, so I
Thank
love
you.
how you showed those different images, because it is so different. It's very hard to actually capture these pieces and in just photographs. So thank you for showing the different angles. I love how it almost recreates how the sun, true to nature, how the sun creates the actual molding and the contours of the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thanks, Jill. We're going to go back to Debora real quick. I know Debora has some really interesting process slides. So I'm going to ask Debora to unmute, and then I'll go back into her work.
Okay.
Debora, can you tell us a little bit about how you got to be inspired by nature, and then, how did you land on this process of working with glass?
Okay. Well, I have always, well, not always, but as a younger child, I grew up on military bases, and I could only find refuge and peace when I would go out in the desert or out alone in the forest or wherever we were stationed. And I found that that was the most peaceful place for me, and I could think, and things were very quiet. And one day I was walking by Pratt Fine Arts Center in the 80s. And well, as a younger girl, I was a ceramist, and I always worked with ceramics. But then I saw this glass blowing, and glass blowing is almost the same as throwing pots, but it's vertical, and it's horizontal instead of vertical. Like when you're pulling pots, you're pulling them vertically, but when you're blowing glass, or sculpting, it's vertical sideways. And it seemed like I found a medium that was so fluid, and you could shape and form it in any way that you wanted, that I just knew right then that glass was my medium, and that was for me. What you're seeing in this image, well, I should back up for a second. When I first started blowing glass, or tried to, during the 80s, there weren't any real women that were doing it. There wasn't that many. And when I went into the shop, they said, women don't really blow glass. And that kind of encouraged. And so I did every job I could possibly do so that I could understand what was going on behind the scenes of what made glass, how it moved, and the tools, the equipment, the language, just everything about it. And so now what you're seeing is the beginning starts of the wisteria tree. And this is part of my process. And so I knew that I would need an armature. And so I was playing around with metal inside of glass, just little pieces, and then sketching through that. So this is the first part of, well, the actual first part is having the idea, the concept. And then this is one of the first sketches of the process. And then the next image that you will see was trying to figure out, I can never actually make a wisteria true to life. So all I'm trying to do is suggest to the viewer wisteria. And there are a couple of ways that I could do it. And one is through color. And so I was trying to just make clusters of little bits of color that had the colors of a wisteria blossom. And so I spent 2 weeks making all of these little bits and then flattening them and then putting them in the kiln shelf that you see behind so that I could roll a bubble of glass on and pick it up. And then I felt like that would give, which obviously did not work. And you can see that, I think, in the next image. Oh no, I'm heating up. Okay, so in glass, we have a tool, it's called a garage. And in this garage, you can bring up to temperature glass of any shape or form that you like, and it'll stay hot, and then you pick it up later. And so I put all of my little bits that I had flattened and cut up and made onto this pastorelli, which is an Italian term for a hot plate. And I put it into the garage waiting for me to pick it up. And then on the next image, I think you'll see the total disaster. And this was my first wisteria blossom. And I had to end up cutting that whole thing off the pipe and throwing the kiln shelf and everything into the annealer to wait till it cooled down so that I could take it apart. But I didn't give up. You can see that it eventually worked where I picked it up and I could pinch them out, and it's starting to look a little bit more like a cluster, a wisteria cluster. And then I think the next slide actually, there's the finished product, basically the finished product without the armature inside of it. So it was persistence, and it's just suggesting to the viewer wisteria. And this is the inside of the armature of the trunk of the tree. So I always have an armature that I make so that it can hold the glass in place. And here's a detail of wisteria that is now hanging in the gallery. I'm now currently working on a blue palm tree for Arts and Embassy project that is going to be shown at the embassy in Nassau, Bahamas. And so Paul, one of my assistants, and I are at the bench blowing glass, and I'm shaping and forming for the top of this tree.
That's exciting. When is that set to be on view?
Well,
Will it be this year or?
Well, it'll be 2024, but it was
Okay.
supposed to be in January of this year.
Okay.
But there's been so many supply chain issues for the government as well as for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
After 2020, there was it was really hard. So, but it seems like we're back on track, and I'm really excited to finish this project. And then I'm also excited about going to Penland for 2 weeks as artist in residence. And then after that, I'll go to South Korea, and I'll do a workshop there. And so I feel like things are starting to come back, and I'm excited after we've been through so much after the pandemic, and
Absolutely.
all the things that's happened with us in society, I guess.
Yeah, all the things. I agree. Well, thank you so much for sharing. So I've stopped the screen share.
Thank you for your interest.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So I've stopped the screen share, and now we're just going to go into some open questions, but I also want to remind the audience that we do have the Q&A. So if you would like to ask a question, which might be answered now or it might be answered a little bit later on, please feel free to do so. We'd love to hear from you and just learn a little bit more about what you're interested in hearing from the artists. I also see we have the chat open. So I'm seeing that there's folks that are saying hi, that they're enjoying the explanation of your work, so they're getting a little bit more understanding about your individual artworks. Someone said, Sarah, that they love your colors. Let's see, what else? And another visitor is amazed that the medium that Debora using is glass. It is pretty unbelievable. So I hope you visit in person and see it. And also commented, Debora, that your way of using light and glass is magical. And another is conveying a memory about a wisteria tree that they had in their backyard, and that they feel like you've captured the texture of the tree and the blossoms. So that just
Wonderful.
some nice comments from everyone. It's great.
Yeah.
Yay. Good. Well, let's go to Frances. Frances, tell us a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities that you see in the current relationship between humans and nature. So that could be, humans with a capital H, like the big, worldwide humans, or you specifically. What are some challenges and opportunities? And then I think we'd also love to hear about how does the digital realm fit into that relationship, because you work in digital quite a bit. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. It's a big one. It's a big question.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to start with the opportunity aspect of it. I feel like, and this also, as Jill's experience growing up, I think I want to connect it a little bit to my upbringing. I grew up in a household of an arborist. My father works as an arborist and agronomist. So nature and the study of trees and plants, the close observation of trees and plants has always been, like the centerfold of everything, that had to do with my household. So going to the nursery, seeing the plants grow, that transformational process, I think kind of sensitized me to paying close attention, right, to things. And I think that kind of dovetails as well with being or having become an artist. The fact that drawing is also a way of paying close attention to something, looking closely, studying it, discovering things. And as Jill said as well, there is so much like wonder in it, right? There is so much like transformation in it. So for me, that part of my life has been a great opportunity. At the same time, I think that as an artist, I also want to say things that are, harder to cope with, or talk about things that are bothering me or things that are affecting me, right? So I guess some of the challenges, right, about that relationship with nature also has to do with the place I grew up in, right? So Puerto Rico, that I think is undergoing, something that is absolutely cyclical, like hurricanes and atmospheric phenomena ravages different parts of the planet, aka Guam recently, right? So there are many places that are also seeing the effects of climate change and just like everything in general. But I think that one of those things is especially have to do with movement and migration, right? Like how you might want to kind of stay in a place where you feel a sense of belonging, right? Where you understand your circumstance, where you understand your surroundings, where you have built a culture around that atmosphere, right? That kind of like becomes part of your identity. Yet the transformations and also the unsustainability of the political and social, relationship between the current moment of a place and that relationship with phenomena such as hurricanes and floods and climate change in general will make it hard to, right, like kind of make that life sustainable. So I've seen how my work in a way has kind of been a window into understanding that, understanding the history of that, kind of trying to visualize ways of also like imagining another future, and also kind of ways of reframing, right, that maybe that experience or that reality. So it is a challenge, that relationship, but it's also just art for me is like that tool where I do see like opportunities to understand and build or rebuild. It's so yeah, I think that's kind of like a pretty open answer to it, but it's a big question. That's the best way I think I can answer it. Regarding the digital realm, also I think that has to do with just like the family things. I've been sensitive to things. I've always been like very observant. But I think something that really impacted my work was the fact that my father used to do these like big studies of plants in different forests. And he would just like create these like databases by hand of, every single characteristic of every single tree that he would look at, right? Like in that given, a plot of land. And so he would measure, talk about the conditions, species, name, everything. And then he would come home and I, as a teenager, would transcribe all of that data without having been to that place, but I would transcribe all of that data into an Excel sheet, right? So I would digitize all of that, that then he would just like translate into a GPS map. So in a way, like I was kind of imagining, right, like all of these forests through data as well. And I think without me knowing, and this was like years of doing this just to, help out, be part of, the business in a way. It was a great way of having an interesting relationship to my father's vocation as well, right? But it's amazing how that, without me knowing, just made me find meaning in data in a different way, right? Like my work extracts from whatever information I find online, like it can be a text, it can be a visualization of data. And I always think that there's more to it. There's more to it than just the color or the information that is being provided. I find ways to, because of that, sensibility that I developed over the years, I kind of find an opportunity to unmute that and provide more knowledge or more experiences or more, I don't know, some other aspects that might not be shown or expressed in those data sets. And I think the unnamed is definitely something that does that. And I've done it in multiple ways, many, many ways. But that is a really direct example, very direct example.
Yes, you've definitely worked in a variety of different media and different materials, but really conveying the beauty of the patterns, even if some of the story behind the data might be more negative. To some, there's still a lot of beauty in the way that you take the data and represent it visually.
I mean, as an artist too, I think like drawing is a way of also bringing people in. Like I think about the other piece in the exhibition, Murmuration, that it's about a really pestering element of the atmosphere with, the mosquito, but it also requires a lot of skill, right, to live with all of these variables, right? When we live in Florida or, in anywhere that is kind of has a tropical climate, you kind of get accustomed to that. It becomes part of your skill set, right? To just be able to keep on going with your day with all of these things going around. So that's also like one of the ways that I like to reframe things, like through drawing too, through the seductiveness of the line, of color, of texture, of depth as well, the work on relief. So art is definitely, through its forms, a vehicle, a tool, to just redirect without being oblivious to the issues, but redirect the gaze. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to go to Jill next, because the way Frances was talking about the patterns and reframing, but also thinking about historical perspectives and political, social. How do you, from your perspective, Jill, think that art, and it could be, big art with a capital A, making art, but also viewing and practicing art making can help people reconnect with nature? Can it do that? Oh, we're gonna go ahead and unmute.
Okay.
Got it. There you go.
Can you-
Gotcha.
Okay, great. Yes, I think it's a great and a very big, hefty question as well. I'll do my best. I think art gives us an opportunity to have a moment, time. So time is my sort of overarching answer to that. I'm reading a great book right now, actually it's right here, Patti Smith's biography called Just Kids. And in it, she talks about her first experiences with art. And there's a great quote I've been sort of pontificating on. And she says, to be an artist is to see what others cannot. And it's a beautiful quote, and I agree with it. And I was just thinking about, to add to it, I'm grateful for the time I have to spend with art and to think about these things and to reflect upon them. And I think that as evidenced by COVID and what Frances was talking about with our digital age, we've really come into like fast forward 4 times warp speed, right? Everything is like zoom, going so fast. And then especially when COVID came around, it was like we went back to sort of like slow motion, and it was very hard for a lot of us, right? But a lot of silver linings came from it. So I think that art just gives people a moment to stop and reflect, and these brilliant artists that we're here with tonight, also we've committed a lifelong practice to this. So hopefully, pouring all of this energy and thought into this translate to when it's up and being viewed by viewers, and thanks to museums such as the Cummer and other opportunities. Public art I love because it's very accessible to everyone. Hopefully that moment translates, right? And so for me, I love translating that awe and wonder and really reconnecting back to the magic, because there's so much magic out there. We just don't really have the time or the opportunity based upon our human construct that we've created. We're all surviving and doing the best at that, right? And so I just hope that it sort of transmutes that moment, and to convey that, nature does a beautiful thing. It sort of lures its organisms in by its beauty and form, right? And a flower is brightly colored or a certain shape so that a bee will come or a butterfly will come. And it's almost like biomimicry. And so hopefully with what I'm trying to do, it conveys the message of my love and reverence for nature. These are almost like tributes to nature. And hopefully sharing that also shows that we can protect what we love. Hopefully it helps the viewer fall in love and so raises our collective unconscious to help protect what we love, right? So there's a lot more to it, but I think I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you so much. Sarah, so we for the audience, we had a couple of different conversations before we actually published this talk and came up with the title of it. So it was definitely a group effort, and we really got to kind of the essence of what all of the artists were thinking and trying to convey in their artwork, whether it's personal conveyance or messages for viewers. And the idea of the spiritual connection with nature kind of resonated, I think, differently for each of you. But that was something that we were hearing loud and clear. So we specifically chose to put it in the title. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with nature, whether or not it's spiritual, but also how has it changed over time? And has your artistic practice changed your relationship with nature, or vice versa? Has the relationship with nature changed your practice, or maybe both?
Well, I think I can start from the middle of that question, because I grew up in the Midwest, and I think as a kid in the Midwest, your life is kind of ruled by the seasons because the seasons are so clearly defined. You know, it's like fall to winter to spring to summer. You know, your life is just kind of ruled by those bold seasonal changes that occur. And then about 10 years ago, I moved out to Southern California, and my sense of time and relationship to nature really changed because those seasons were no longer obvious. They were very subtle changes. So I think my observational skills became very sharpened by moving out to a place where there are seasonal changes, but they are much more subtle. And so I think nature has challenged me in a way to be more observant and to pay attention to those subtle shifts and changes. And I think also, as I have grown up, climate change has become more and more apparent. And especially living in Southern California, where we have wildfire seasons or droughts. And I think there's a sense of preciousness now that I experience when being in nature or observing nature, because everything just feels more ephemeral. And, like this year, we had an incredibly rainy winter in LA. And so right now there are so many flowers blooming that I've never seen before, or there's such a profusion of growth right now. And I'm just trying to pay attention to everything I'm seeing, because I don't know when the next time will be, when we'll experience this kind of weather again. And so I've just become a lot more grateful for what I'm able to observe. And I just, if I can capture the essence of something, I really liked what Debora said about kind of having like a suggestion of nature, or like a suggestion of like the real thing replicated in the work. That's something that I cherish in my work, and also in the work of other artists that, are dealing with landscape or their surroundings, like in their own way.
That reminds me, I just moved to Florida 4.5 years ago, and I remember that feeling of walking out the door after doing something, very common, like going to the grocery store. You can go to the grocery store anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, but walking out and seeing a palm tree, like, what? Forgetting where I was. And we get so used to, which also can be translated into, we become desensitized to our surroundings. And when you pick up and change location and now have different seasonality, different weather patterns, different flora and fauna outside your window, it does help you pause a little bit. So it's fun to hear you talk about those life changes, but how it also helps kind of reinforce your relationship with nature.
Yeah, and I think just going back to the word spirituality, I think for me, the spiritual relationship with nature is one of awe, just being in awe, being in wonder of the natural world, but also just feeling like an immense amount of gratitude for the natural world as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I know I scripted a few more questions, but I don't want the audience to get antsy. So, and there are a few questions in the Q&A. So I am going to flip over to here and see what folks have to say. One is for Jill. They're saying that in the first and second scrolls, they see a phoenix and a dragon. And they're wondering if that was intentional, and if so, what's the meaning behind it? Or is it just not intentional and happenstance?
I love that. Actually, it gives me goosebumps because it is so unintentional. There's so much intention behind the top half of my drawings. They're very thought out, articulately thought about, and very tightly drawn, but the root systems are all very organic and spontaneous, and a lot of chance plays a role in it. And that's where I really let nature sort of dictate what happens. And I love sort of surrendering to nature in those moments. They're actually sort of my most favorite parts of the work. But it's so funny. I did not intend for that to happen, but I have another black and white, large 20-foot scroll that the same exact thing happened. And I can share maybe that photo with you later. It's on my website. If you'd like to go to my website, it's there, you'll see it. But I don't know, it's like a phoenix rising of the ashes, right? There might be something there that I need to probe. So thank you for that astute observation. I guess movement, in my younger year, I was dancing and moving a lot. So I think movement in my body gets into the work, especially into the root systems and the fungal network. So there may be something to that, but I've had that before. And also female figures work their way in there, but that dragon keeps coming back. So thank you for the observation. And it was all chance.
That's magical.
Thank you.
Love it. Love it.
That's magic, right?
One more question for you right now. Can you speak to your recent mural project and the challenges of translating your media to an outdoor public space?
Sure. So this piece that you see right here, this is a 16-foot drawing that, as Kim was mentioning, just got translated to an outdoor mural where I gilded an entire 80-foot by 25-foot wall. These are all experimental sketches, parts of the process. This is a post sign that goes along with it that identifies every single plant and mushroom. But there was a lot of experiment. This is sort of like a laboratory science breeding ground for me. So there was a lot of experimentation and working it out, and time playing a part of it to see how it was going to respond to its environment. And instead of working against the environment for this public art project, I decided to integrate the environment. So it's a gilded wall. However, it will slowly oxidize over time. So it's a living wall. And again, letting nature play a part into the work. And there's a lot to unpack with this public art piece, but we worked it out and figured out the materials and the scale. And I had a team of amazing, actually it turned out to be all women that ended up coming to help. And I would not be here without them, that I'm really grateful for. So yep, we just finished it. It's up in West Palm Beach now at South Olive Park.
Nice. We can't wait to check it out.
Thank you. Thank you. For
Congratulations. That's
Thank
big. Does anyone else on the panel have public art projects that they've worked on and that might still be up? Frances, do you want to tell us a little bit about yours and what that experience was like?
Oh, sure. It was wonderful. First of all, it was very challenging too. It took a long time. These projects, we're used to working in the studio, and having like immediacy to what you're doing. This, I love the idea of working as a group, as Jill says, right? Working with a team, also having the resources to produce at a scale that you traditionally wouldn't really be able to, and in materials that require like subcontracting and that type of thing. So my project was titled Line to Line, and it was commissioned by the MTA Arts and Design of New York City. So it's a public project that it's very, very big. It's a pretty much like a bridge, and both sides of the bridge have like these fences that are designed by me, and they're cut out in metal and then painted black. And it really just like transformed the whole space, right? And it was a series of like, I think 6 bridges in Mount Vernon, New York that were being redesigned and commissioned to be, just like intervened by artists. And I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to do that. And I think it took like 3 years, 3 years to do. And then after that, I feel like it gave me confidence as well, to work in a larger scale. And I took other commissions that were more like private, also working in metal in large scale. I had worked in metal before, but at a smaller scale, in sculptures and different things. But it was just wonderful too. And also learning about the little just details of code and security, and for the people who are using this, right? Because we're used to making things that we're just going to put in a frame or an installation or a museum sitting on in your house. But here it's supposed to be useful, right? It's something that has, in my case, it's meant to be a barrier, right? So that folks don't fall to the train tracks. So so it had, all these specifications about the size of every perforation, that type of thing. And I kind of liked having those quote unquote limitations, because it opened up, right, the possibilities, and so some constrictions to the kinds of shapes that I could do. So I loved revising the designs over and over and over again. It just helped me polish it until at the end, it just came out really nicely. Yeah, thank you. I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to be on that bridge. That sounds
I
amazing.
saw a question, by the way, that I find really cute. What does my father think about my work? I kind of
Yeah,
by surprise, and I love it.
yeah.
No one has ever asked me that. Thank you, Ellen. But quickly, my dad has always been such a supporter. He always loved architecture, so he has like an artist within. And when I was a kid, he would give me like little like stencils and different tools for landscape design, and I would just draw freehand with that. And I think that definitely was something that nurtured me too, like for an aerial sensibility and for drawing and silhouette. And so he loves the intricacy of the work, and he's always intrigued. And whenever I'm working with an X or Y subject matter, he nerds out and he sends me articles and stuff. So it's always a great dialogue. It's a way of having that different kind of relationship, not only as a father and daughter, but an intellectual relationship and visual relationship.
Still feeding you data.
Yeah.
That's great. We have another question from Julie in the audience. So Julie's asking to anyone, so any one of you can answer this. You all are heavily influenced by nature and have shown it beautifully in your artworks. Within your artwork, you do not incorporate actual natural objects for the most part. So how do you feel about land art and pieces like this that physically bring plants and natural materials into the artworks?
Mm-hmm. How do I feel about it?
Any thoughts?
Inspirational and gorgeous. Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah. Jill, you're muted.
Is that better?
Yes.
One quick thought on it. I mean, I love land art. For me right now, I don't know if you could see in the background, but I'm trying to experiment with actually using the dried mushrooms in these small little sculptures. But for me, there's a logistical problem with it. I mean, you have to think about, I think about my work as archival. And for me, that's actually what I'm currently thinking about with these pieces. What's going to happen? How do I archive them? do they just deteriorate? And is that part of the process? I might gild them so they might stay preserved. Preservation is a big part of the work. So I guess when you're using natural objects, those are things that you contend with. I'm curious to hear what everyone else thinks about it as well.
Yeah, I am very admiring of artists that work directly with nature. I think for me, my work is about the idea of translation of nature, and there being a transformation. And I talked about like not even wanting to work directly from nature itself or even from photographs, because I'm interested in this sort of filtration that can occur when you work from memory. And just for myself, I'm really interested in the work being imbued with that more abstract lens. But I am completely admiring of other artists that are interested in working with the actual physical objects found in nature or working directly with the land. I mean, an artist that was really inspiring to me early on was Andy Goldsworthy. And there's something so beautiful about artists that are willing to allow time and weather and just the natural world change, or sometimes even destroy their art. But it's something that I love looking at. I maybe someday I will be inspired to push my art in that direction, but we'll see.
I think it's also like a way of life. I have some artist friends from Puerto Rico. They are twins. They're called the Suarez twins, Jaime and Javier Suarez. And they are pretty famous for making the most incredible, installations using, they're just like conceptually driven, but they also use like earth, shells, seeds, or all sorts of things. And they're so smart about it, right? If you can look it up, I'll write it down. It's really beautiful, but it's also like a way of life, right? Like if you want to go out, you want to be them, like both of them, like camping, going surfing, like they're just engaging with these materials. They don't just like go one day, they're just like living it, right? And that is also an interesting thing, right? I feel like it kind of dovetails with this idea that Kim brought up before, right? Like what is like data, or not the question about like what data means to me, right? It's also like an opening of that space. Like for me as a woman, I don't feel for many reasons like that safe, let's say, like being out there in the woods by myself, even if I wanted to. So in a way, like there's also, you don't have to be, in the woods to make art like that. But I'm just saying like there has been some sort of like circumstance that has given some kind of distance, right? And so I've used data and like the screen and all the things that I see through the computer, the screen, and like, in my walks or whatever, to open that, like to broaden it. But I think that yeah, in order to do that type of thing, you just live a different kind of life as well. I mean, we've only mentioned men, and also the land art exhibition that happened here in Ithaca, where I live, Ithaca, New York, was also many men, who are doing things. So it'd be great to, I'm sure that there are many, many other women who are actually doing that kind of work right now too. So yay, great. It's wonderful. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Deborah, did you want to jump in at all?
Well, I agree. I love, well, I'm just trying to think of how I could say I might utilize the natural. I do use natural flowers and buds, dried flowers in my books that I make, in some of my sketchbooks of different orchids that I've pressed. But I wouldn't say that is the same thing as natural art. But I do enjoy it.
Yes, understandable. And you do. So, and for example, in the Wisteria botanical sculpture, the base is an actual rock. It's not a piece of glass that looks like rock. It's an actual rock. So
Actual stone, and each stone I go to different quarries around the Southwest, maybe Arizona, Mexico, different places, and picking out stones. And it's a very interesting process. And I really am in love with stones, natural stones.
There's a great, it's probably a children's book. And I think the author is David Bruckach. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but it's titled Everybody Needs a Rock, or Everyone Needs a Rock. And it's just about that importance of, having something from nature, something tangible, something that you can hold in your pocket and feel whenever you want to. That is really cool. Also,
these stones that I'm using are one stone that I'm using right now is 700 pounds. I don't know if you want to put that in your pocket.
Not in the pocket. Probably not in the pocket. That's great. So we have about 10 more minutes. I'm not seeing any more questions from the audience. I did just type in the chat the artist that Frances was mentioning, because you sent that to us separately.
Yeah,
so folks can
that.
folks can take a look at that. Javier and Jaime Suarez, that sounds really exciting. We'll take a look at them. What are all of you most excited about right now? Any exciting news? Any new projects you want to talk about? Anything you're especially grateful for?
Well, I'll start.
Yes.
I am extremely grateful for my friends and family, and especially my great grandsons. I have been through a lot this year and last year, and every morning they come over and they give me a hug and a smile. And just a simple little smile from this 1-year-old great grandson just warms my heart, and it means the world to me. I'm thankful and grateful that I'm able to go back to work now, and I have a couple of things in the future that I'm looking forward to: the residency at Penland, the workshop that I'm doing in South Korea at the Biennial, and then the Distinguished Artist Award in Washington, D.C. in September, in conjunction with the Hillwood Museum. So this is something to be excited about. And thank you so much. I'm excited to be able to participate with you all.
So wonderful. I'm glad you have your great grandkids nearby. That sounds like a big light. That's great.
It is. It's
That's
a joy. Yeah.
Good for you. Anyone else have anything exciting to share with us?
I'm just grateful to have art in my life. Like it's such a generative thing. I think every day I feel lucky, that I have that itch, to make art, and that I also have people who want to see it and are curious and are, want to experience art in whatever way, right? It's not just like us who are the artists or people who are supporting, right, through institutions or sui generis initiatives. It's more like also the people who are here listening to us and engaging in this conversation about art. So I'm really grateful that just keeps going, and that it is my motor. And also, speaking about children, happy that I'm gonna have my first child in August. So also being generative. And so that's my big project. That's my big project for this year. And being ready to be a working mother artist with my little apprentice. So that's
yes. Another little artist. We can't wait to meet her.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jill or Sarah, anything you'd like to share?
I guess just the fundamentals. I'm grateful for my health right now. I think as we all are after COVID, right? And just for the ability to make work and be here in this space and to share it, to be in public spaces with people, and just going back to those fundamentals. And I'm grateful to be able to go this summer and actually be in nature and experience in nature and just disconnect and sort of get it back infused, a nature infusion. So
Unplug. Yes, we're grateful for Zoom and for technology, but yes, it's important to unplug.
Yeah, definitely.
And I also feel very grateful for, I've had a pretty busy spring traveling a lot. I just wrapped up a residency in Miami, and I was in North Carolina participating in a show out there. So right now I'm very grateful to be home, and for, that rainy winter that now is has left me with a very beautiful long spring, summer in LA. So yeah, I'm happy to be back here, back in my studio, and yeah, just feeling inspired to be in the studio and to take long walks.
Kim, and what are you grateful for?
Oh, this is amazing. And you all are so inspiring. I mean, I'm really grateful to work for a nonprofit organization like the Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens, where we get to connect with you, present high quality artworks and garden exhibitions and experiences in nature every single day. And I'm inspired. I'm hoping that people are leaving inspired as well. And that they'll take the time to, whether it's sitting out on the back deck or the front lawn or going to a park or coming and hang out in the gardens or traveling, that we do take the time to surround ourselves with beauty and culture and just be. There's a lot to be grateful for. Yeah. No, you all have been so wonderful and so generous in spending time with us, sharing your stories and talking. I'm really grateful for this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you find yourself in the area, please stop by. The exhibition's on view through November 30th. So to our presenters and to our audience, we hope to see you at the museum too. And I hope you have a great evening.
Well, thank you.
You're very welcome. Mwah! We love you, Gal. Yes. And we'll share this recording when it's ready.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Welcome. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.